You are in the meeting now.
We'll just give it 1 minute to let everyone filter in. All right, well, I guess we'll get started here. So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon and happy Thanksgiving for those of you joining us from south of the border. This is our monthly Discovery to Commercialization seminar series, and the purpose of this series is really to bring people from all different backgrounds together in Vancouver with respect to both academic research as well as industry research. Just for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Granville, and I'm the host of this series. And it's fun. This series was actually started by the Faculty of Medicine and funded by one of their strategic innovation funds. So the purpose of this, as I mentioned, is to sort of increase awareness. What we try to do is bring in both a couple of half industry talks as well as academic talks, and sometimes we combine at the end a core facility that we like to get out there to advertise that could be of interest both to the academic and biotech communities. So we got a great lineup today. So kicking us off would be Lillian. She'll be talking about some robotic-assisted virtual care, followed by Tim. They got some great news. I'll let him describe that to you. And then at this point, we'll have questions and answers. And then the second half will be started by Stephen, and then finally by Roger. And then again, at the end, there'll be questions and answers. And I encourage you all to put all your questions in the chat box. This event will be recorded, and the moderator will lead the questions at the end. And please keep your, I guess everyone's microphones are on mute already. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our chair, Dr. Rachel Ritchie. Rachel is the Director of Innovation at Vancouver Coastal Health. She is a champion for innovation and is working to foster innovation across VCH to improve healthcare. She has over 20 years of experience in life sciences and R&D as a researcher, policy analyst, strategist, and leader. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Clinical Medicine from Oxford University and completed her postdoctoral studies at the Boston Children's Hospital. So at this point, it's my pleasure to hand the mic over to Rachel to take over.
David, thanks so much to you for that kind introduction, and to you and the team for organizing this monthly session and inviting me to chair this one. So thanks to all of you who've joined in as well. As David mentioned, innovation is my passion, is my life here at VCH. And it is a strategic priority for us. So we see innovation as the way our healthcare system can continually evolve the services we provide to stay at the forefront of care. So that's about understanding changing patient needs. Maybe they're wanting more virtual visits. Maybe they're bringing in biosensor data. Maybe they're bringing in precision genomic data. So it's about being responsive to those needs, but it's also equally about being able to leverage huge advances in science and technology, like those coming out of VCHRI and others in our broad ecosystem. So within VCH, we're focusing on 3 things to support this innovation for impact strategy. The first is fostering a culture of innovation. So we're really trying to make it possible for, I sense a little bit of feedback. Is that okay? Amanda, you'll let me know if that's a problem. So the first thing is really making it possible for our clinicians, our frontline staff to spark ideas and to share them, share them with us so that we can spread and scale them. We're really trying to bring some clarity and transparency to how innovation happens, how ideas come to life at BCH. We're trying to remove barriers, especially barriers and administrative barriers, sometimes operational barriers. Lastly, we're really focusing on partnerships. We do healthcare really well, but innovation requires all hands, many types of capacities, knowledge, expertise. So we really look to partner with that. So on a day-to-day goal, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to connect our clinical and operational needs with solutions, whether they're internal solutions or external solutions. I'm trying to support opportunities for clinical validation. If we have external partners or even people within the organization who need to access the real-world clinical setting to test their ideas, we want to make that possible. And then we're partnering to take those validated ideas and get them implemented and commercialized. So with that focus, I'm really delighted to be moderating today's session and delighted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lillian Hung. So Dr. Hung is an assistant professor at UBC School of Nursing and a clinical nurse specialist within Vancouver Coastal Health. Her research mainly focuses on examining how technology and environment impact the care experiences of persons with dementia. Dr. Hung has experience in patient-oriented research and knowledge translation, and her research is practice-based and patient-oriented. So important. So it's so nice to see it grounded in that clinical context. She is committed to facilitating connectivity between academia and practice, working collaboratively with interprofessional practitioners to find practice solutions to address pressing problems in the care setting. So with that, Lillian, I'm delighted to have you kick off today's workshop.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me see, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let me optimize the screen. If I go to this one. Oh, for some reason, let me see if I go that far. Optimize screen. Okay. That's okay. That will mean that we won't be able to hear the sound of the video, but that's okay. Are you seeing okay of my slides? Okay. Okay, I'm going to start. Yeah. Oh, I was not able to advance my slides. Okay, here. I could go this way. Okay. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things that I have written in this article that just got published this month. That what I really want to do is really try to highlight if we want to integrate technology in clinical practice. Like in my mind, I think it's really more about the how and the why. So how we may successfully adopt and adapt at the new tech thing in healthcare. And I also think that the context is extremely important. And we need to kind of spend time to ask those deep questions about the nuanced relationship between the features of a particular technology device and how they impact the people who use it, and especially when we talk about healthcare in the clinical setting. In my work, the people are patients, and the patients I serve, they're older people. Many of them have a cognitive impairment or dementia. Caregivers, that means like families and their loved ones, and the frontline staff that I work with. So today I'm going to talk more about, I'm going to focus on the device for virtual care. And I have been studying the use of the iPad, the touchscreen tablets in dementia care for a few years. So you can see that on the left-hand side are, I show you a group of Telepresence Robot that they are actually commercially available in the market. So on the right-hand side, it's the iPad that we've been using for a few years in VGH, and now it's also available in the Richmond Hospital as well. So what I want to tell you, it's a story about how things evolve from the idea from a clinical problem, a pressing clinical problem that we have, that when we have started to talk about how we can better serve the population, and then that evolved to the idea about using a Telepresence Robot to assist virtual care. So our study actually started out in 2016, and to look at how video calls through an iPad might support patient care. That project was funded by DCHRI, the Research Challenge Project. And we find that in our huddles that when we started to talk about patient care, and the staff, they find that the patients often feel very stressed in the hospital setting. So we kind of like try to figure like what are some of the things that we can do to support our patients. And some of the staff is saying that like when the patients see their family, then they feel a lot more reassured, and they feel that sense of safety. So we try to use pre-recorded family videos to help reassure our patients with dementia. And we work with patients with different level of dementia, so the early stage, the middle stage. Also, we also work with the people in very late stage of dementia. And we were very impressed that it worked really well, including the people who were in the advanced stages of dementia as well. So over the years, and the staff got so used to using the iPad, and people started to try other features beyond using it for family videos or video chat with family. They use it especially when we have the visiting restrictions during the pandemic, and staff use it for online game, and they also use it for other purposes. Let me see, I can play this for you. Unfortunately, I might not have time.
Yeah, I don't know, Smarty.
Do you eat the red ones last? Touch the red ones and see if they go. You eat the red ones last. There you go.
She's actually giggling to me.
Do you eat the red ones last? Do you suck them very slowly? Do you crunch them very fast? Here we go.
Chew them.
Okay, find me another red batch. All right.
Unfortunately, you can't hear the sound, but a lot of it is giggling. That she said that those bubbles is kind of like Smarties, that she would chew them, and yeah. So
Smarties.
So we also find that the staff would use it for a virtual cycling program, that they would pick places that they would like to go, and we have staff would put those pedaling, what we call passive active exercise machines, and let the patients to mobilize and move their legs, and watching a virtual bike tour and to exercise. So. And then we looked at the other people that have adopted the virtual cycling in outside. People would have projected images on the wall. You can see on the right-hand side that this guy is riding a bicycle in his room, and the projected image is really it's really an image. Yeah, so he could turn his room into anywhere that he would like to cycle to. So we had to try a similar idea, that we projected the image of the cycle tour to a wall space for the patients to cycle. It also worked really well. So that gave us kind of idea about how we could adapt from what we started with, just a pre-recorded family video using iPad, and using the iPad for many other things as well. So Simon Sinek, he talked about the factor that drives human behaviors. He called it the golden circle, and this is the golden circle. He argues about knowing just the facts and the figures, and that might not be enough to motivate people to make behavior change, to adapt a new device or a new thing that they need to do, because sometimes it doesn't feel right just knowing the factor, just the numbers. So I agree. If I go to tell the staff about the numbers, that how about the percentages, but that might not be enough to drive the staff to adapt to use a new device. What we need to do is really try to connect people's head, try to understand why do they want to do this, and also how the device is actually going to make their work easier. So the WITFM is what's in it for me, right? So people need to understand that what's in, in this new thing that that you ask me to do that will actually provide me benefits. And the other thing, the context is also extremely important, yeah. So these are some of the how questions that I think they would be very helpful to ask, like how may technology enable person-centered care? How may we adapt these devices to meet the local needs? Every context, like in a long-term care facility, might be a little bit different. Each the site or the units may have something that they may need in order to adapt the technology. And how maintenance and ongoing support may need to be put in place in order to make things happen. I'll tell you a little bit how we evolve and make some adaptation as well. And how do we address like the ethics and some of the concerns of the people that they talk about, and how our existing environment affects equity in digital access. This is also a problem that I think we need to pay more attention to, and how people can have access to digital device. Yeah. Technology abandonment. Yeah. So we know about 50 to 75% of all these assistive technology that they developed, and they often get abandoned within the first 3 years. So it's quite a waste. In our study that the staff in the focus group, they told me that there, with the iPad that we use, there are 3 main barriers for the technology uptake. One of the really biggest fear factors coming from a lack of knowledge about, people actually kind of like a little bit fearful about, you asked me to play the family pre-recorded video, but where is it, and how I'm going to turn on the iPad, the password, and how do I connect it, and how do I play? There's a lot of little nuances that we need to help to make it really clear and easy for the staff to use. And there's a question about, what about if I drop the iPad, or if this is too heavy for my patients? And when we did the observations and when we talk to the patients, that they talk about, like, we can't carry this. Like a lot of these older adults that we have in the hospital, they're quite frail, and they're sitting in different positions. They're sitting in a wheelchair at the different positions. It's really hard for them to see the iPad as well. So there are a lot of these how technology have impacts on people if they're sitting in a bed, lying in the angles. So it's not possible to ask them to hold the iPad, or ask the nurse to hold the iPad when they have medications or other things in their hands. So technology adoption, it's really not like this one-time implementation to say, like, we have this implementation plan and you do this 1, 2, 3, and then we're done. And it actually requires ongoing support to help people to kind of like talk about this and solve those problems that I talk about, those barriers. So I would say one of the top tips that for these like technology adoption, it's really about co-creations. Like, we need to work closely with the users to make those adaptations. Yeah. So when we look at the iPad use over the last few years that in our clinical care, time is really a big issue in dementia care or in the care of older adults. So we're thinking about, what about the telepresence robot that people have been using in the tech companies? Yeah. So so this particular telepresence robot, it's kind of like a tablet. It has it has a wheel that what it does is it can self-drive, and it doesn't actually require any effort to connect. So it makes it a lot easier. Then the robot can also have multiple sensors. So they could go to a patient's room and then start to connect, and it knows to go back to the dock to self-charge, kind of like the Roomba vacuum that we have at home. So it solves those problems that we talked about, like you could have like staffing shortage, the workload, people don't have time to make the connections, and tech literacy, people get worried about how do we connect and all those things. So so it makes it a lot easier, like what we call like the zero effort to connect. Yeah. The screen that could also like go up and down, and it could tilt at a different angle that will meet the specialist needs of our older adults. And potentially we can program these telepresence robot to make regular visits, so it will address the problem that the people have very limited time to access virtual care, because I know that, when staff, when family wanted to arrange virtual care, it actually takes quite a bit of time to make the arrangement, to make that happen. And, and there's limited time that the family can spend with that person. So this is my final slide. So the goal of, of these robotic assisted virtual care is really about quality of life. And if you can see that the outcomes that I have on the slide is we want to measure how by using this robot that it can help improve people's mood. And I talk about people often get very anxious and stressed in the hospital, and this will apply to long-term care as well. And you can imagine, like during COVID, when the families are not allowed to visit, people with dementia feel very confused about why the families are not coming to see me, right? And we hear about weight loss, and people are not drinking enough as well. Yeah, so people just get very nervous. Having family to be there, socially present and talk to the person through the Telepresence Robot will be very, very helpful. And I can imagine that we started, it's just kind of like with the iPad, people would be very smart to kind of explore other possibilities to use the Telepresence Robot. I imagine that the Telepresence Robot can be used to do a teaching. We can, remind people about, health promotion, hand hygiene, how to, use PPE. We can teach family how to use PPE. The possibility is really limited. It's unlimited, yeah. So, so I think that's, I'm going to end here, and I look forward to if there's any questions, and we can talk about that later. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Lillian. That was a wonderful presentation, and I know I have a number of questions that I wrote down. So, but I would encourage everyone, as Lillian just invited you, to include some, and Amanda also, just include your questions in the chat, and we will, right after Tim's talk, we'll return to those. Okay. So we'll plow on ahead, shall we? So I'm delighted to introduce Tim Felkuten. Tim, I see you're there now. That's great. So Tim is the co-founder and chief technology officer at Sonic Insights. He is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at UBC and holds the Laszlo Chair in biomedical engineering. Dr. Felkuten received his PhD at Berkeley. He has worked as a researcher in the robotics group at IBM and was a visiting scientist at Super Aero CNRS in France. So Tim, over to you. I hear you have some exciting news to share. So I'll hand the mic to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Ritchie, for the introduction, as well to Dr. Granville, and many thanks to Kara and Amanda for inviting me to present and for organizing this exciting series. So I'll talk to you about a way of palpation, which is an ancient medical techniques that doctors use to push, feel, and interpret tissue to discover disease such as breast or prostate cancer. With my colleague Robert Rowling, we wanted to develop quantitative palpation using medical imaging and in particular ultrasound. This area of research is called elastography. Let's consider a simulated tissue having a softer background shown in blue and a stiffer inclusion shown in red. Conventional imaging will not distinguish this inclusion. To make it appear, our method involves pushing the tissue with an activator and measuring the resulting shear waves or vibration pattern in tissue with ultrasound, from which we use a mathematical model to recover the distribution of tissue elasticity, quantitative in kilopascals, which roughly follows the wavelength that are present in the vibration pattern.
Tim, sorry to interrupt. Are your slides, do you have slides? I'm just wondering if, there we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know why the delay.
Oh, okay. Super.
This technique is called shear wave absolute vibroelastography, or S-wave, and it is the only technique that works at depth, volumetric. It's multi-frequency and real-time. Okay, I don't know how much of this was lost, but basically the idea is that we use an exciter and activator that generates shear waves in tissue, and these shear waves are measured with ultrasound. With a mathematical model, we can recover tissue elasticity in kilopascals throughout the region of interest. We have developed, S-wave images for the prostate, for the breast, and for the liver. We have chosen this area of applications because there are 1 in 8 women who will develop invasive breast cancer, 1 in 7 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer, and 1 in 5 people worldwide suffer from chronic liver disease. The correlation between disease and stiffness is strongest for us for the liver, which provides the first focus of our commercialization efforts. Many non-alcohol related causes lead, especially poor diet and obesity, can lead to fatty liver disease. This fatty liver can cause inflammation and tissue scarring, which leads to non-alcoholic steatohepatitis or NASH. Progression of tissue scarring is associated with a stiffening of the tissue. The earlier NAFLD can be identified, the better for the patient, the provider, and the payer, because it is reversible in its early stages by changes in diet, exercise, and weight loss, while the cost and difficulty of dealing with advanced disease grow drastically. While biopsy is the gold standard for diagnosis, fibrosis, sorry? Yeah, so biopsy is the gold standard for diagnosis, but liver stiffness and fat can be quantified by several non-invasive techniques. Okay, among these, the most accurate one is based on MRI. Fibrosis is determined using magnetic resonance elastography, or MRE, and steatosis through an imaging technique called MRI-PDFF. MRE works by placing an exciter against the ribs of the patient and visualizing the shear wave field within the patient and producing a map of elasticity. The most widely used test is the Fibro Scan. During the Fibro Scan, a knot between the ribs is applied to generate a shear wave through tissue, and the wave front of the shear wave that is generated in tissue is monitored with a single ultrasound transducer. The attenuation of the ultrasound echo signals is also measured, and that provides the cap or attenuation measure by a FibroScan device. Okay, we started our S-wave liver assessment studies using a cart-based ultrasound machine with a mechanical 3D transducer. And when they moved on to the Philips flagship machine, the EPIC machine, which basically we have used to produce both images of elasticity and attenuation. For attenuation, we produce a measure called ACE, or Attenuation Coefficient Estimate, which Rob Rowling developed for his studies of the placenta. And we have compared the way S-wave works with MRE and the way FibroScan works in comparison to MRE, and we obtain far superior results with our S-wave and ACE technique. Based on our early CART system, our startup company, Sonic Insights, developed a point-of-care portable liver assessment system called VelaCure. I'll show you a video in which it shows the patient who basically lies on a vibrating board. While the examiner enters the patient information, Then an ultrasound transducer with an appliance that helps locate the transducer between the ribs is used to obtain an elevational scan through the liver, guided by the computer user interface. Multiple sweeps are required, and the median and IQR elasticity and ultrasound attenuation are reported. Our system combines the advantages of both MRI and Fibro Scan, and it is significantly lower cost than the Fibro Scan system. It is protected by 7 issued patents, a couple of patent applications, and we plan to do more in the coming year. We also characterize VelaCure in its ability to discriminate a healthy cohort from patients with fibrosis, and we have provided threshold values that yield good sensitivity and specificity for this task. Like its bigger cousins, which are cart-based, VelaCure provides measurements that are much closer to MRI than the FibroScan system. And we are hopeful that this system will be widely used because there are over 100 million North Americans with suspected NAFLD. In general, their management follows stratification based on blood tests. Those in a low-risk categories continue to be monitored by their family physicians. Those in the intermediate and high-risk categories are sent to a specialist. A few of those are sent directly to biopsy based on their symptoms and high-risk factors. The remainders actually have to go through an elastography type of exam, either through the FibroScan or ultrasound or through MRI. And those who are at low risk are returned to their family physician, while those at high risk continue to be monitored by specialists. Now, Sonic Insight's VelaCure could replace the FibroScan with a better measurement technique. We have recently obtained FDA 510K clearance for use of VelaCure with the FibroScan as the predicate. But VelaCure could also replace ultrasound-based elasticity or MRI-based elasticity estimates in the specialist care, and can be actually used in the primary care context to stratify patients according to their risk. Thus, we can also use VelaCure very early on with the idea that routine monitoring will encourage lifestyle changes. Thus, our system could become an invaluable tool for patient management and overall health and wellness monitoring, not unlike the way we use blood pressure today. So the Sonic Insights team includes lab alumni experience in elastography, and they are complemented by an experienced set of product and business manager, an experienced board, and clinical advisors who worked from us from the beginning to define our clinical studies. We met our CEO, George Aliftiras, through at UBC, and we did this while we were part of the Hatch business incubator. We've used many resources from UBC and DCHRI throughout our journey, and maybe we can talk more about this during our discussion later on. And I would like to thank very much the many co-investigators and collaborators, students and mentors, and especially my long-term collaborator, Rob Rowling. We have received very, very good funding to pursue our work, some of which was offered with great flexibility from the Laszlo Chair, for which we are truly grateful. The photos below show our initial home at Hatch and our current one at the VCHRI, where we have a very nice view of the mountains from the VGH Research Pavilion. It's been very interesting to participate in this journey from discovery to commercialization, and I'm very excited to see that our technology can be used to take care of patients and manage the cost of this care. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tim. That that's an amazing story. I definitely I have a lot of questions for you. Please put your questions in the chat, and I guess I will start with some of the questions that came in for Lillian, and then we will begin to mix it up as questions come in. So Lillian, first question to you, and I'm going to combine a question from David and Amanda, is first of all, what do you see are the key enablers for implementing or facilitators for implementing technology within long-term care? And then sort of the flip side of that, what are the limitations?
Let's talk a little bit about facilitator first. And like what I talked about in my slides, the co-creation, and it's really key, I think. We need to see that we need to see the ownership of that particular technology implementations. And they know that this is going to help to make their work easier, especially in long-term care, that we know that the staffing situation there, it's very challenging. Yeah. So, and we also need to know the nature of the workforce in the long-term care, that it's made up of mostly care workers, they're care aides. So they're a different level of technology literacy. So if we expect them to learn complex things, complex steps in order to make the technology device happen. Like, for example, if I send them a robot that, they have to learn about how to use it and how to program it, and that it's just going to be like too overwhelming. They are struggling to do, the work that they are doing right now. So, but with the Telepresence Robot, then it will likely, well, I say likely, we have to test it, yeah. But I really believe this is going to really help to save time for their staff, because it can do all the work on its own, and it doesn't need, to try to, you have to like kind of try to log in and try to find the platform and try to put in the password and try to connect, and the robot connects automatically on its own, and then goes back to the doctor to charge itself, and then you don't have to like pick up an iPad and it's dead, right? And so I think the enabler, the really key enabler, is really to understand the context and knowing that that you need to work with the local staff to understand the local needs in order to adopt the technology. Yeah. And then I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
It does very well, I think. So what would you say the limitations? I guess it's the flip side. It's the the learning curve associated with the technology. You mentioned that. Any other ones stand out?
Well, so you need to engage the staff in order to understand their needs and what are some of the challenges, right? So, but in order to engage them, that people are very limited with the time. So it's the same thing, right? Time, right? How you can engage people to do this work with you, right? So even if you want to have focus group, that people are very busy with their work, and in order to have them to come to work with you, I think that would be one of the biggest challenge. Yeah. So I think in order to address that challenge, or the limitation, would be really about going to places that you have that if we have a relationship, and really try to find those early adopters, or champions, that who would love to join you, to have ownership of new technology. So then they will be willing to invest that time to work with you. So once you have those local champions, then you can, gather people to talk about, having conversation about like, what is the things that we can co-create, what are some of the strategies that we can co-create to make this thing work. It's just like the iPad that we had in the beginning, that it was too heavy for the patients to carry, and the angle was a problem. So people can't see very well. So when we work with the local nurses, then we find out that we can use this mechanical arm, that you can adjust that, people could wield it, and this is a familiar device, and the nurses love to use it. So that's how we can build on it. Yeah.
Thank you. Super. So Tim, I have a couple questions for you coming in. First is my own question. To what extent is this in use? You presented a really nice clinical workflow toward the end of your presentation. Is this actively in use? You've obviously got some validation data. Just can you speak to that?
We have an early adopter program that includes close to 15 centers now, including Beth Israel and UC San Diego centers with KOLs in the field that are evaluating the device. So the plan is to roll this out through these early adopters who we hope will become our champions.
Thank you. And staying with you for a minute, I have a question from Layla. So regarding, can the technology be used for superficial structures like skin?
Yes, I think the technology can be used for superficial structure like skin. We need to switch to a high-frequency ultrasound machine and go to much higher frequencies. We really are talking, I'm not sure what is the depth that you're interested in, but definitely we will need to move to much higher frequencies that we are currently using now. I don't think there is a fundamental limitation to that, but there may be other tissue characterization techniques like OCT that may be more suitable for that type of problem.
Thank you. I think we've got a little bit more time for questions. So Tim, you mentioned the early adopter program. What comes next, in particular within Canada? What do you see? What does that look like?
Yeah, we are working with colleagues at
your microphone has gone a bit muted.
Sorry, I stopped at UBC to make sure that the internet is not in trouble, but it seems to drop out. Yeah, we are working with colleagues at VGH and St. Paul, and we have potential for partnerships in Calgary as well. So we are definitely looking at Canada as well. In a certain way, because of the different systems in different provinces, this would require a lot higher effort per customer than it does in the States. So our business plan is to concentrate first on the U.S. market.
Thank you. I would love to speak to you about that after. VCH has a partnership with the CanHealth Network, and it actually supports spread and validation and spread and scale of technologies across Canada. So any Canadian company is eligible to look at that program. So we should follow up. I think we've got a couple more questions. Lillian, I have one for you. I thought it was really interesting the way you, when describing the use of the iPad, you know, families said, oh, we can do more with it. So they were sort of driving uptake of different functionalities. So to what extent, you know, because you're there on the front lines, to what extent are patients pushing the use of technology, or to what extent is the system or the clinician saying we need to bring this in because it will facilitate? So
I think it's a combination of coming from all different stakeholders. Yeah, I think the managers are kind of like having the pressure to, you know, that the family needs to connect with their loved ones or patients or residents in our system. And the staff see the needs of our patients. And we started the project because it was a pressing problem that our patients often feel very stressed, and, you know, that when they felt overwhelmed, that, you know, sometimes when they are provided care, then they felt so overwhelmed, they communicated to staff with like hitting the staff, and we were getting staff injuries. So the staff find that, you know, by using the family videos to reassure the patients that help them to feel safe, it would actually save them time to do their work. So I think it's a combination. And during the COVID pandemic, it was it was a huge need from like all areas, right? So when we have people there in their final days end of life and out of compassion, you know, that was a huge need to connect. I think it's coming from all areas, and it was very rewarding when the staff see when a patient connect with a family that maybe in another country. I remember that one of the very old patients that will have dementia that she was connected with her boyfriend, and like her face like completely light up, and like it was so rewarding for the staff to see that, right? Yeah.
Super. Thanks so much. That leads on a very positive note, and I'm sure we will see the push-pull balance change as we go forward. I think we're ready to move to part 2 now. So I hope I see Roger, and I hope we have Steve with us. And I heard Steve was here, so I'm going to press on and introduce Steve Reynolds. I'm going to assume he's there. So Dr. Reynolds is a specialist in infectious disease, internal medicine, and critical care. He is the site medical director at the Royal Columbian Hospital and TV vet chair in critical care research. Dr. Reynolds practices critical care at the Royal Columbian Hospital and leads the lab focusing on respiratory physiology at SFU. He has an interest in early stage medical device development and serves as the lead medical advisor for 4 medical companies. So Stephen, delighted to have you here, and I will hand this over to you to tell us about your the new technology, which it looks like you're using here.
Thanks, Rachel. Do you want me to just use this screen, or do you want to share the screen, or me share my screen? Which would be the best way? Oh.
Let's see. I think typically you can have your choice if you feel comfortable sharing. If not, Amanda, do you have the slides? Or?
Sure, I can share the screen. I'll just
okay, super.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Let me pull it up.
And while Stephen's doing that, I'll remind everyone to put their questions in the chat. You can send them to me or to Amanda privately if you're feeling introverted today, which is totally fine.
Can you see that there? My slides? Yep. Excellent.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so there we go. So first, with any talk that I know I only have briefly 10 minutes with everybody, but you always have to start. I teach my residents that if they don't have a disclosure slide at the beginning, you should always be suspicious. So I'm the co-inventor on the initial patents on this device. I get speaking and medical fees from the company that spun out from it. They do partially research, support my lab, and I do own some shares in the company. What I'll tell you about it briefly is what is phrenic nerve pacing, and then I'll go through some of the data that we've developed in our lab, and then I'll tell you some of the studies that are ongoing in terms of phase 2 and now rolling into phase 3 trials. If I can get that in 10 minutes, I win. So your phrenic nerve is the nerve that goes from your spinal cord at C3, 4, 5 to the diaphragm. You have one on your right and one in your left. It initially, they recognized very, very early on that if you stimulate this nerve, the diaphragm contracts. And in the 70s, there was a bunch of papers as they were developing cardiac pacing that this nuisance phrenic nerve gets in the way when you try to pace the heart if you don't get your electrode in the right position. But since then, to be clear, the guy who initially came up with it, Andy Hoffer, he's a professor at SFU, and his mom was in the ICU and having a tough time getting off a ventilator. And and so he had asked about exercising the diaphragm, and eventually led to we collaborated a bunch on it, and eventually led to the development of a central line, which is something that we put in about 95% of our ICU patients to give special medications with embedded electrodes on the outside. And you can see, hopefully you can see my arrow here. So the embedded electrodes captures the phrenic nerve as it passes on the left side and then on the right side. So the central line is put into the big veins either in the neck or in the subclavians. So this here is on the left subclavian. It can also be placed in the left internal jugular, which is the standard way. And it's placed just by the standard technique that all intensive care doctors use called the Sellinger technique, where you poke it in, basically you poke a needle into the vessel, put a wire in, then put a dilator in and take the wire, and the catheter and then take the wire out. So pretty straight ahead in terms of putting it in. And then the stimulus passes through the vessel wall, stimulates the phrenic nerve as it goes down to the diaphragm, and it's attached to an external control unit. And with some control, you cycle through the various different electrode combinations to be able to best activate the diaphragm and have it exercise. So the next question I think that I should tell you is the question of who cares? Why do you care about the diaphragm and issues like that during mechanical ventilation? Well, the diaphragm is the major muscle of respiration. It's responsible for 70% of your work of breathing. And so it actually is quite an important muscle in this regard. And so I'll go through some of our theories around it, but really the long and the short, what I'll mention here and then I'll mention at the end, is there's a bunch of different things it could do by activating the diaphragm in somebody who's on mechanical ventilation, so on life support. So it could prevent, by activating the diaphragm, so working the muscle when it wouldn't otherwise be worked, it could prevent diaphragm dysfunction over time. It could treat established ventilator-induced diaphragm dysfunction. It could avoid ventilator-induced lung injury, and I'll show you some of our work that's shown that, and it could reduce lung collapse or atelectasis over time. So is ventilator-induced diaphragm dysfunction a problem? So what are we trying to address to begin with? One of the things to take a farther step back is mechanical ventilation a problem in general. So mechanical ventilation it's life-saving. Bjorn Ibsen was really considered the father of the ICU when he did a tracheostomy for a polio patient and changed what was a death sentence to in fact life-saving by putting a tracheostomy in and squeezing a bag of air. We thought it was really good at first, but we know that over time, and we developed knowledge that the ventilator is a double-edged sword. It helps people, but it causes problems. It injures the lungs by blowing air into the lungs, so that's positive pressure as opposed to how we normally breathe by negative pressure. And it can cause problems not only with the lung, but with the diaphragm. We know that Sandy Levine in 2008 produced a seminal paper in the New England Journal and showed, it was a really interesting comparison. He took brain-dead donors and he compared them after 18 to 69 hours of ventilation to folks that were undergoing thoracoscopic surgery, took a biopsy of the diaphragm, and he showed that in just the 18 to 69 hours, you have a greater than 50% reduction in cross-sectional area of your diaphragm. So the diaphragm atrophies really, really quickly when it's not being used, and that makes sense. It's a constant duty cycle muscle. You're sort of always supposed to work it. And not only does it atrophy quickly, but it's associated, we know that in about 60% of patients who are on mechanical ventilation have some degree of diaphragm dysfunction, and it's correlated positively in a bad way with poor outcomes and death if you do in fact have established diaphragm dysfunction. The other thing that I would comment on that's important to know is ICU is actually not only it's important because you're dealing with the sickest of patients on life support, but it's economically really expensive. It's about $1 million per year to support an ICU bed, and in the United States, it's 0.5% of the U.S. GDP. So $27 to $52 billion is spent annually just on ICU care, not on hospital care, just on ventilated patients. So if you can change the natural history, the course of this, it's actually super important both financially and from a morbidity perspective. So then the question is could phrenic nerve pacing treat or prevent ventilator-induced diaphragm dysfunction and have an impact? We showed in 2017 that we did it initially in pigs, and then we also had later that year the first series in a series of people. That by placing by pacing animals every other breath over 50 hours, we were able to reduce diaphragm dysfunction. I won't go through, or atrophy significantly. I won't go through this in detail. I'm speaking really quickly, just recognizing I have 10 minutes. But you can see the control animals. These are animals just mechanically ventilated. These mechanically ventilated, never paced. These animals here, you can see there's a significant loss in cross-sectional area, and that correlates to the bead there. And then you can see in the mechanically ventilated pace, it's very similar to the control animals who are never ventilated. So by the long and the short of this is if you pace the diaphragm, it prevents atrophy over time. So what else? So that's the diaphragm. Do we have any evidence that it helps to protect the lungs? So what I mean by what atelectasis and atelectrauma is and why it's important to know is that when you have air blown in by a mechanical ventilator, you actually have collapse of part of your lungs. The air is, the total volume is actually preferentially shunted to the top of the lungs, and at the bottom of the lungs, you slowly develop atelectasis. That's even in normal lungs. And in lungs that are inflamed or have pneumonia, that process is accelerated, and the abdominal pressure pressing up is actually even exacerbates that more, so people who are morbidly obese. This causes part of the lungs to collapse, and that's actually pretty important because we know that their alveoli, which are the tiny sacs of respiration, they open and close when they're beside the areas that are atelectatic or collapsed. And that causes shear injury and problems for them. So that we know atelect trauma is a significant driver of lung injury. We also know that when the lung functions the best when it's all the way open because it's the most compliant. And as the lung gets stiffer and stiffer, it's more injurious even on the normal alveoli, even on the ones that aren't inflamed at all. They start seeing more and more tidal volume because there's less of the lung involved with respiration. So this is a bit of a complex slide, but it talks about driving pressure. And as much as we in ICU like to sound that we're complicated, it's really not that complicated. It's driving pressure has to do with compliance. So if you think about a balloon, driving pressure has to do with how hard you have to blow up that balloon. So we know that the more driving pressure required to blow up a patient's lung or that balloon, the more the higher association with death. So driving pressure is negative or is associated. Higher driving pressure is associated with death. And
Steve,
by
reducing about a minute and a half.
Thank you. Okay. So that leads us to it can potentially improve that. So I'm going to go through very quickly. This is the lung design or the design that we did with animals and ventilated them for 50 hours. You can see pictures worth 1,000 words here. You can see that the paced animals had less atelectasis and there was more in the not paced. And this is a complicated diagram. I won't spend much time on it just in reference to the time I have left. But you can see in the mechanically ventilated, this is more atelectatic and less. This is the true controls. It's evenly distributed, and then the pacing is quite similar to that. We did mean alveolar cord length to quantify that, but suffice it to say, it's more, there's less atelectasis that way. And then just briefly, what's interesting here too is we are looking at the brain injury associated with mechanical ventilation, and we showed that that mechanical ventilation is associated with a significant injury of neural injury in the hippocampus. Won't go through that too much because it's a bit of a complicated discussion that we can have later. But I did want to just complete with the phase 2 trials that have been completed in Europe. So 21 sites in France and Germany led by Martin Dress. And they randomized, these are patients that had a tough time getting off the ventilator, and they were followed for 30 days. This is the graph that's important here. This is the change of mean inspiratory pressure, so the strength. And you can see that over time, the patients who were paced, that's the top diagram here, they were the ones that actually had increasing strength over time. The control group had very little change in strength over time. So I can stop here with the slide. These are just the data we have to date that it will have an impact. So we can see the slides that my group and my lab has done, as well as the data in phase 2 trials, which is has been completed in Europe, and phase 3 is enrolling right now in North America, and a whole bunch of things. Hopefully I finished in 10 minutes.
I think you did. We'll have to go to the judges for that afterwards. But thank you. Really a compelling story, and I think it resonates with everyone that's been aware of what's been going on with the pandemic. So thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll pick up discussion and some questions after we hear from our last speaker, Dr. Roger Tam. So Roger, I'll have you standing by, please. Let me introduce you to everyone. For those that don't know Dr. Tam, he is an associate professor at the UBC Department of Radiology and School for Biomedical Engineering, and a member of the David Mowinigan Center for Brain Health. His research interests center around the application of computer vision and machine learning methods to the quantitative analysis of medical imaging. Dr. Tam is the director of the Engineer in Scrubs program, which teaches biomedical technology process design that emphasizes collaboration between engineers, clinicians, patients, and other key stakeholders that can influence market adoption. Roger, delighted to have you join us today and to hear more about the work you're doing. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So I'm going to be talking about the Engineers in Scrubs program, which is a graduate program in the School of Biomedical Engineering. My main disclosure is the program is currently under a sponsored research agreement with the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute, which is a nonprofit organization. So the program was founded in 2011 by Dr. Anthony Hodgson as an insert-create program with the goal to train graduate students to be leaders in medical innovation with a design process that emphasizes impact and collaboration with clinical stakeholders. We're in our 10th year now. We've done 33 projects, trained close to 140 master's and PhD students, and we've had one spin-off company named Arbutus Medical, which I'll talk about more in a bit. So here's some examples of successful projects, these from an academic perspective, and these 4 projects represent 2 of the core themes we've had in the past number of years. The drill cover and the screw cutter are both global health projects with surgical applications, and these the sports grip and the accessa belt were projects that we did with Praxis for individuals with a spinal cord injury. I won't have time to talk about all of them, but I'll talk about these 2 just to make some points on commercialization. So the Arbutus Medical drill cover was started as an EIS project in 2012, 2013. By the end of the course, they sent a prototype to Uganda. And the company formed in 2014. They were awarded $1 million by Grand Challenges Canada. And to date, about 60,000 surgeries have been performed using the drill cover. So what it is essentially it's a sterilizable cover that allows surgeons to use hardware stored drills, which can't be really sterilized. So the idea is fairly simple, but it's taken a lot of engineering and testing to get to the current points. So the following year, the screw cutter project came along. And again, a very bright group of students, and this project received a lot of international recognition early on. And this device addresses the lack of appropriate length screws for orthopedic surgeries in low resource settings. And basically, this device can cut screws to the desired length without damaging the threads, and can still leave a good tip. This was a great project, but from a commercialization point of view, the project is essentially stalled. The team hasn't been able to find a payer, or at least one that they can trust to do the right thing. So why commercialize? Commercialization hasn't been a big part of EIS, and we've been ramping it up in the past couple of years, and the program's been doing well, at least meeting our academic objectives. So why do this commercialization thing? And the answer is simple. It's impact. We're not a business program, but we are a translational program, and impact requires economic sustainability. There are thousands, tens of thousands of drill covers out there being used every day. There's exactly one screw cutter being used. And there's an analogy to rhinos. There's a gentleman in South Africa by the name of John Hume, and he's got a rhino farm. Every couple of years, he cuts the horns off the rhinos without killing them, and he argues that this is an effective way to save the rhino from extinction. So he sells these rhino horns, right? So his assertion is that if it pays, it stays. So clearly, this is somewhat controversial, right? There are lots of people who would say, well, rhinos are magnificent animals. You should save them. You should put money into them just because you should save them, right? So in our programs, students often have this idealistic philosophy that if something can improve a person's health, if they can create such a device, then somebody should pay for it. Of course, this is not realistic, right? So how do we equip the students to approach this field the right way? And we provide support elements to inspire them as well as to enable them. We have a wonderful advisory committee, and Dr. Hodgson and Lawrence Buchan are both on that. But I'll talk about some of the other members in a second. We have workshops by entrepreneurship at UBC. In fact, we had one this morning on competitive landscape analysis, and we're going to have another one on payer models. We provide guidance on navigating policy and regulations. Dr. Jonathan Agnew is a policy specialist with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and he gives a great talk on how to protect people, on how to talk to policymakers. And we're setting up a new makerspace at VGH, and I have to give Dr. Granville a huge thanks for his support there. For the past few years, we've been using the workshop at the Center for Hip Health and Mobility for our prototyping, but we've essentially outgrown it, and this new facility provided by FEAST-HRI will really allow the students to produce more mature prototypes. So now I'll talk a bit more about the mentors, the other mentors on our advisory committee. Jeff Ochenlek, he's a CEO of Claris Healthcare, a highly accomplished engineer and entrepreneur, and a real heavyweight in the Vancouver medtech scene. What I really love about Jeff is that despite his many successes, which he can talk about that all day long, he usually talks about mistakes because he knows that that's where the real lessons are. And it's also very inspiring for the students to hear about somebody like Jeff making mistakes. Some of the key lessons that he conveys, listen to your users, but watch for bias. So make sure that you're talking to a representative group of users. Don't create a technology and then look for a market, or then it can be too late. Right? So he likes to give the example of the Arthrobot, which he created with his team in the 80s, and widely known as the world's first surgical robot. And essentially what this was a very, very fancy system, voice control system for limb positioning during surgery. It cost a lot in money and resources to develop, but it turns out it doesn't really have a practical use. Basically, surgeons don't need a fancy robot to move the patient's limbs. What they need is simply a way to hold the limb still after it's been moved, which can be moved manually. So it turned out to be a very expensive lesson. Jeff loves to talk about this to teach the students about really working on the right problem. Another mentor that we have is Paul Cubbin from the Sauder School of Business. He's Assistant Dean of Innovation, and he also holds a number of other leadership positions. He's a straight shooter, always has lots to share. But a couple of the key lessons that's stuck with me are find enabling technologies that can solve multiple problems. So perhaps this is the difference between the drill cover and the screw cutter, in that the drill cover originally it was intended for low and middle income countries, and there's certainly still a continuing market there. But they found other markets in the veterinary market as well as the military, and most recently in trauma centers in the U.S. Whereas the screw cutter, it doesn't really have other markets, at least not that the team has found so far. And we also have great mentors from Praxis. They're very business-minded. In fact, two of our main contacts there, Penny and Arushi, both have MBAs. Praxis actually hosts entrepreneurship competition and accelerator programs for promising health technology. Very importantly for our group, they delivered the message that commercialization and social good are highly compatible. Related to that, they believe that consumers, and in this case, people with spinal cord injury, should be involved from the very beginning of the design process. So they're involved in all key decisions, including which problems to work on. The big advantage for our program is that Praxis facilitates direct access to consumers with spinal cord injury for our projects, which has been great for consultation and for testing. So finally, I'll just touch on some of the support elements that we provide after the course is done. We're engaged with UBC, and a number of our projects have gone through the formal programs at UBC. And as I mentioned, Praxis also has entrepreneurship programs as well. They're eager to see our projects go through. We're collaborating with BCIT. They have a fantastic facility called Make Plus, where they have a certified process for taking a prototype from a rough prototype to a ready-to-manufacture stage. We also provide financial support. So we provide a prototyping budget that the teams can use even after the course ends. We also provide stipends in partnership with MyTax so that students can work on their EIS projects as part of an internship or even for a thesis research if that research is related to an EIS project. With that, I'll wrap up. I know for sure that this is not a complete list of people that have helped the EIS, but yeah, I thank everyone who's been involved. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. Great presentation. So I'm going to open up the last question period now. Maybe have about, excuse me, just under 10 minutes. So please put your questions in the chat. I'm going to ask the first question that's come up in the chat to Stephen. Can you just maybe give us an update on where you are with FDA approvals, excuse me, and some of the challenges getting the technology to the bedside?
Sure, and I'll be really clear about where I'm at with the company. So I don't work for the company, nor am I a representative of the company LungPacer. I sort of do independent work. I help to, as I said, on the initial patents was around when the company was birthed and moved along, and I work closely with them, but I can't speak for them, so I'm just cautioning that. But I can say that LungPacer did obtain FDA fast track approval because of the implications for during the COVID epidemic, which is pretty exciting. And they're actively, as I said, in those phase 3 trials right now in North America. So it's, and then the challenge to getting it to the bedside was another part of that question that I can jump into as well is, you know, we've worked really hard to make sure that the device looks a lot like regular work that an ICU doctor would do, and that it can be deployed to multiple members of the team to do the technology. So the idea is that the physician would place it just like they place a central line, and that it would have the full functionality of a regular central line, plus the pacing aspects, and that other members of the team, the respiratory therapists, could then use the optimization mechanism to find out the best electrode pairs that work, and so it could be part of the regular workflow of multiple members of the team. The issue always in a lot of these things, and as I've been involved from the very beginning, is there's no interest in developing something that doesn't benefit people directly and help folks, and not even help folks just a little bit, like help folks significantly. So that's part of it, is getting the science together for that, recruiting enough patients and demonstrating that. In the ICU world, there's a lot of ventilators out there, and they like to differentiate themselves, but you know, the secret sad truth is that there's no difference, right, between any of the ventilators. All you can do is blow air in, and you can either control tidal volume, so volume, and then the system determines the pressure, or you dial in pressure and the system determines volume. That's it. You voluntarily trigger, or it does it on its own. So what the challenge here is that this is a total different way of thinking around ventilation, and it gets back to all the way to the iron lung before we actually had positive pressure. So part of the challenge too is a paradigm shift for clinicians to use it, and what I'm excited about is it just provides a different tool.
Thanks. Sorry, I muted myself. Thanks very much, Stephen. Like any muscle, use it or lose it, and it's a great way to use it. I have a question for Roger now around the Engineer and Scrubs program, and particularly Felkuten's advice around avoiding bias. So clearly, Engineer and Scrubs, you're really positioned to understand, the clinical need or the market. So how do you, within your program, manage bias or train your students to think about bias?
Right. So what we really encourage is to don't take a single person's word for anything, really. Jeff Ochenlek has what he calls the rule of three, which is a good rule of thumb. Often we get a clinician presenting a problem, and we will ask the students, go talk to at least a couple of other clinicians and see what they say, right? A lot of times it depends on the experience of the clinicians, depends on what environment they've worked in. Everyone has certain biases in their work, right? So I would say that's number one thing is to talk to a number of different people.
Thank you. One more question. How do people, if they've got an idea, clinicians, if they have an idea, how do they get in touch with you to be part of that program or to put their need forward?
Certainly, you can start with an email to me, and I'm happy to, have discussions with anybody. Really, we're very inclusive that way. I would say that the most compelling problems for our program tend to be the ones that are still fairly open. I know that sometimes clinicians will have a need, but they already know what they want to build. In that case, I would say, one of the undergrad's capstone, courses might be a better fit. In Engineers and Scrubs, we try to get the students to, because they're graduate students, to be very creative in that process and be wide open when they're thinking about a clinical need, and to think about a range of possible solutions. So, anyone who is kind of at that level of thinking and wants to engage students in that type of process, we definitely welcome them.
Thank you very much. I think now I'm going to ask the other two speakers, Lillian and Tim, to be at the ready, because I'm going to ask one question, the same question to all speakers. So I guess whoever goes first has the hardest job, and whoever goes last will have to come up with the best response. So no, I'm just kidding. Okay, and I'm asking this because, as I said at the beginning, innovation is what I live and breathe. And so my question is, and it might sound self-serving, but and I will go in order, I guess. Lillian, we'll start with you. What, if anything, can VCH do to support the work you're doing and to support innovation and uptake, so implementation, spread, and scale of your technology? Or Lillian, to you, and we'll do it kind of rapid fire, so you have a minute max.
I think that there are so many things that the VCH could be in support of the work that I do. Having leadership and infrastructure to support it made a huge difference. Just like the iPad project, we started with the VCHRI funding, $5,000. That was the start of our project, right? And the funding support was important. Having the infrastructure to encourage frontline clinicians to work with someone like me is also important. But having the leadership, that culture on VCH to do research is even more important. And especially during these days when, you know, there's competing priorities. And sometimes I hear that people would say that, you know, that research is not as important as clinical care. So if people need to think about if they could shift their thinking about how they could mutually be reinforcing, like having research to help to improve the clinical care, then, you know, that would be really, you know, it goes through all the layers. If the top, you know, people like you and, you know, and David, you know, they go to the directors and managers, and the managers and directors feel that, you know, this is a priority. It's important for clinical and quality of the care that our patients receive. And, you know, that goes a long way.
Thank you very much. So Tim, is there something VCH can do for you?
Yes, I think you can lobby the government to reintroduce collaborative grants for people who are CIHR funded. This program was dismantled, and it's a shame when you look at the SBIR program in the States and many programs in Europe that, you know, at the bottom of the pyramid where they need most of the money, we have very little in Canada. That's one comment. And the second, I think you could act as an intermediary between business, working with the School of Business and research labs to make sure that our students get a very early idea of what's the commercialization potential in the lab, and get them to patent early and pair them with physicians.
Thank you. Awesome. Stephen, same question for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm just going to carry on on Tim's comments. I think but really the key at the end of the day that I see, at least in the medical domain, is and the secret sauce is the connection between clinicians at the bedside and innovators, and the gelling of those folks, which you can never really predict, right? You don't know who will work together. Like I can be really clear, when I got involved in lung pacer, Andy and he came with a crazy idea that just would never work in the ICUs, and we spent 4 hours in our first conversation, and we knew that something was there at the end of it, and that led to, for me, off into this career of doing that. But I've been in, you know, I'm involved with a bunch of other companies that I've, at least with the concepts, if they're early stage enough and that I can engage in and can really change and help develop that. And so I think the issue about innovation overall is it's a bit of an illusion to say that there's one person that drives these through. It's the combination and trying to create those relationships and mindfully do that. That's the thing, is try to create mechanisms by which people bump into each other, have concepts, bounce it off each other, and then you can really let those crystallize. And that's the key, I think, at the end of the day, is find the interested clinicians that have the clinical problem, find the people that have the innovation and the training around it, and nobody holds all the skills, but let them create the circumstances by which they can build a team to do that.
Thanks. That's a great answer as well. Roger, so you have to have the best answer. No, I'm just kidding. But so is there anything that you think VCH can or should be doing to support the work you're doing?
Right. So yeah, so the previous speakers haven't really left me much to add. But you know, seriously, it really is about the connections, right? Especially for our program. With our collaborators, we're nothing, right? So the only bit I would add is companies. Is you know, in terms of the innovation pipeline, we're really looking to place our students in internships, especially in partnership with MITACs, in companies where they're really interested in that design process. And I'm really hopeful that BCH can help us do that networking.
Thank you. Well, with that, I think I'll hand it over to David, and I know he'll agree with a lot of the comments. And in fact, you know, this workshop series, and a number of other things that that David has done throughout his career are really trying to work to that collision space, and how do you foster that, you know, interdisciplinary, very hard to plan and design intersection and collaboration. So thank you to all the speakers today. It's been really inspiring, and I'm really excited by what I've heard, and want to, you know, stay connected to all of you and reconnect with some of you that I already knew. So David, I think I hand things back to you right now. So
So I'd just like to echo Rachel and say thanks so much to all the speakers and to the audience for all the great questions, and thanks to Rachel for doing a great job chairing. And then last but not least, I'd like to thank Kara, Amanda, and Vivian for all their hard work putting this on as usual every month, getting this together. So just to remind everyone, we're looking for suggestions for the, we have an idea for the January session. We'll skip December, but in January we're having a session that's more focused on the microbiome, and companies doing working in that area, as well as some clinical work and science in that area. But then we're looking for suggestions after that. So if you have an idea for some kind of scientific or medical problem or disease, and the company and suggestions for a few companies locally that are working in that area to find solutions for that clinical challenge, please let us know. And then lastly, in the summer, we're still deciding what to do, but hopefully maybe there'll be a chance where there can be coming together towards the end of summer, and that'd be possibly highly optimistic, but we're still looking for ideas of wrapping things up. So, and then lastly, I'd ask everyone if you could fill out the survey, and within the survey you can actually make suggestions on potential topics for the future and names, and we'll be happy to hunt them down to put on the session. So again, thank you, and I guess this ends the session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You are the only participant in the conference. Your call will be disconnected.